All right, how y'all doing? Welcome to Flesh and Blood Unseals. I'm your host Chris, and with me here today I have Tariq. Tariq, Tariq Patel. Is that how you pronounce your last name, Tariq?
That is.
Awesome. Tariq's the right guy to talk to us about deck techs because, well, he did a pretty cool thing not too long ago. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
So yeah, 2, 3 weeks ago now, I guess at this point, I ended up winning U.S. Nationals with the Briar deck that people, I'm sure, have been seeing everywhere.
Yeah, and I guess that's the deck we all want to hear about, or well, at least your current version of that deck. So let's. I'm going to switch over the view here so that viewers can see. So we're up on FabDB, and we've got we've got the deck in question. So do you want to tell us anything about these stats?
Yeah, for sure, I would love to. So starting off, I guess I think the thing that most people notice when they first pull up the deck is almost the entirety of the deck costs zero. And I took that to an extreme where I even cut the Electrify, which is functionally a zero cost card because it replaced itself with a draw if you played it from Arsenal. But as you can see from this bar graph here, it's almost entirely zero cost, with the exception of Command and Conquer.
Got it. That's the
And
one cost two here.
that's the only cost too. So besides the three Command and Conquers, the rest of the deck are zero costed.
Hmm. Wow.
The, yeah. So that was the core idea when it first started, was how many free cards can I put in a deck? And originally I wanted them to all be red and call it, mono red aggro. But the reality of it was there wasn't enough, good red line cards to make it work. So kind of had to branch out into the yellows and blues. Down below, you can see, the couple of yellows that there are: the Plunder Runs, the Ball Lightnings, the Ravenous Rabbles. Essentially, only the highest value cards, and then a couple sideboard cards as well. Blue as well. Again, just the cards you really need is just Plunder Run and Sting of Sorcery, your two best blues. The Force of Natures and Captain Calls are actually sideboarded. So the 81 I run are functionally all the red cards minus the Exudes and Command and Conquers. And then the rest is I take out all the yellows and blues except for the Plunder Runs and the Ball Lightnings. So yeah, it's almost an
Wow.
entirely red based deck.
Hmm. And so you're just whatever you can do, you're doing it for free, and you're doing a whole bunch of it every turn.
Right. So the idea is if I don't have to pay for a mana, right? Because every deck functionally requires a pitch card. And if you don't have to pitch a card, you're functionally up a card every turn. I know a lot of you watching may be newer to the game, but that's an extremely important concept to kind of understand, right? If
Yeah,
you have a
absolutely.
card that costs six, if you're a Guardian player, for example, that requires at minimum two blues. So that six costed card has to get value of at least three cards to make it worth it, right? Because you're pitching two cards and then the card itself to play. You functionally need to get three cards worth of value out of the card you play. Otherwise, you're down a card in that turn cycle. Or you need a threatening enough on hit effect to make up that disadvantage somewhere. So this deck is kind of the polar opposite. Instead of everything costing, five, six mana, it costs zero. So I only need to get incremental advantage, incremental damage with every card. As long as I can play all the cards in my hand, I will eke out a small edge. So kind of like the polar opposite to you Guardian players out there that are watching this.
Gotcha. Man, yeah, that's a it's an impressive list. I hadn't heard about the I guess the mono red aggro aspect of this. So that sounds kind of like a magic term to me. Are you coming from a different game background, possibly?
I do. Yeah, I dabble in a lot of different games. My latest obsession is the new Halo that just got released. Getting quite into that, quite good at it. So if anybody out there is competitive in Halo, feel free to hit me up. Always looking for new squad mates.
Oh, no, the new
But
Halo.
yeah, the Halo Infinite that just released
Oh, nice.
343. I think the campaign comes out in like 2 days, so I'll probably be busy with that later this week. But I do have a background in Magic the Gathering, yeah, which is kind of where the pun on the name Mono Red Aggro came from.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
But Chris, why don't we start with the equipment? Because I think that's the most basic stuff we can start with, and it'll kind of give everybody an idea. So
Sure.
for everybody out there, there's only one weapon, which is the Rosetta Thorn. Obviously, Thorn's been showing up almost everywhere in Viscerai and Chain, and I think it's the new de facto best weapon, standard weapon that everybody's going to compare it to if you play Runeblade. So not much to talk about there. Just an incredible rate, 1 mana for 4 damage. So not much else to
Yes.
say there.
Right. It's just like if you're gonna pick something else, you have to kind of talk yourself out of this weapon. Is kind of
Yeah,
how it
exactly.
plays out, right?
The closest comparison is Nebula Blade, but in theory, it offers an additional damage with the rune chant, but the extra mana cost is just almost never worth it.
Got it.
So going down, we got the standard 4 equipment, the skull cap, the tunic, the grasp, and then the snapdragon scalers. People might notice that there's shock charmers in there, and I've gotten questions. Is that for uh, you know Viscera? Is that for whatever? It is purely just a cyborg card for if I go up against Kano. So it is just a way that I start at 44 life because ideally you want to go use it on the turn that they're stacking their damage.
Hmm.
So you functionally gain 4 life. So Kano starts at 35, you start at 44, and you just try your best to race them. Nothing too fancy with shock charmers there. So that's
Got
really
it.
all it is. And then yeah, we're just kind of playing the best generic equipment possible. Spring Tunic probably the best piece of equipment in the game in my opinion. Maybe second only to Husk, but given that it's generic, I'd probably put it over it. The fact that it gives you a free resource every 3 turns is just amazing. And in this deck, it functionally represents 4 damage. So every 3 turns, you're getting functionally 4 damage with your Thorn for free because of Tunic. So
And how many times do you expect to be able to hit the that free resource?
it
Like
depends on the
how many
matchup.
turns deep do you get? I guess is the question.
Yeah, depends on the matchup. In the Guardian matchups, quite a few turns deep actually. So I'll actually end up using it like 3 or 4 times, maybe even 5. So that represents 20 damage that the tunic represents just by itself, which is quite a
Hmm.
lot. In the mirror match, 1 is probably the average, 2 on occasion, depending on how much blocking is going on. I'd say 2 on average is probably what you get out of it most games. So it's actually 8 damage block 1, which is a really good rate.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds
Uh,
like one of the things that you do when you're looking at all the cards that go into your deck is you're trying to figure out what the value of the actual card is, and you
right.
have a rating system set to that. Is there like an official rating system that you've come across or come up with, or just sort of?
I
Um,
have I have my own. It's nothing official. I'm working on an article right now, and I'll probably publish it when it's done. But it's kind of
Sweet.
hard to formalize this kind of stuff. But a resource is almost worth a third of a card, right? If your stock, card in most decks are blue, and it pitches for a card, uh, you know, a resource is worth a third of a card in my book. So
Hmm.
you do this 3 times, you're up a card functionally. And Flesh and Blood doesn't have any permanence per se if you're a player that comes from Magic. So nothing besides auras really kind of stick around. So all these virtual temporary advantages are how you kind of eke the game in your edge. So Tunic being a card over 3 uses is very useful. The fact that it can block a damage is another third of a card. So it's a lot of value in and of itself. Um, is kind of the short of it, but that gets into kind of the nitty gritty and very advanced concepts. So, you know, I'll save that for my article whenever I write it.
Fair.
I do want to talk about Skullcap a little bit because I do think this is probably the most misplayed card in the deck, um, especially in the mirror match. Which, if you play this deck, you're probably going to play a lot. The heuristic I'll give to anybody kind of watching this or listening is just block early and often. um, what you don't want to have happen is you get to the late game and you've only gained 2 life out of this functionally, or 1 life if you can't even get the second block off.
Hmm.
I've blocked with it as early as turn 1, when I'm on the draw or going second. I have a ball lightning and 3 blocks, and my opponent attacks with a 4 card hand, and I'll take an arcane, and then I'll just block the 2 with the skull cap. Because at the end of the day, 3 life is 3 life, and you need every point of the mirror match. So don't feel bad about blocking early and often. I often encourage it. So
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. So that the equipment doesn't do you any good if you're dead, right? So
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
yeah.
It's more so like we're talking the mirror match specifically. Other obviously like in other matchups you play it based on what's going on, but in the mirror I think the ability to try and finesse, a plunder run or something like that, it's super hard to do because one, like even if you get a bunch of embodiments, you may never draw the non-attack action, and you're not trying to throw like 3 cards in front of something, right? Because a red plunder plus an attack in the mirror match is usually representing 7 damage. So it's really hard to finesse a skull cap in a situation that will block more than it's actually worth. If it comes up, great, take it. But I'd say take the 3 life as soon as you can because the way this matchup works, it's so tempo heavy that skull cap is rarely on. So when it is, you just want to get the life. That's my opinion, but other people may say otherwise.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. So that kind of rounds up the equipment. Anything to say about Snapdragon scalers?
It's just the best
Mad,
equipment in the game, I think.
mad
By
power, right?
well, not best equipment, but yeah, best legs in the game by a ton.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask why I didn't play the creepers over the Snapdragon, and the simple answer is this one's free, and creepers cost 1. I think you're kind of trying to live a dream by activating creepers twice, and then that's still 2 mana, which in this deck is functionally 2 cards over 2 turns. So Snapdragon, I think, is just the clear better one in this situation.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. So do you want to get into the meat of the deck here? How do you want to? How do you
Yeah,
want to
the
tackle
meat and
this?
potatoes. Let's talk about the reds a little bit. So, a lot of people I've kind of seen online kind of ask how I sideboard or how you kind of play. I have no classical training or theory about this game. I wasn't really taught by any player that's been starting from Welcome to Wraith. So I kind of built an original 60 and then I kind of added cards for matchups that I thought this would make be better than this one. So as we go along, I'll tell you what cards are not in my 60, and then if people are watching, they could probably reverse engineer what my 60/61 cards are.
Mm-hmm.
So with the red cards, the cards that are not in my original 60 are the Command and Conquerors ×3 and the Exude Lightnings. Or sorry, excuse me, the Exude Confidences.
You just
Uh,
probably didn't have those because they cost something, huh?
Yeah, so Command and Conquer costing 2. That card is purely a hedge for Prism and Lexi. So those are the 2 decks that they'll bring it in against. Aside from that, Command and Conquer stays on the board the rest of the time. I've seen people play it in various different matchups, but it's too resource heavy for this deck. It's a very like silver bullet card, and I play it for very specific reasons. 1, to get Lexi Arsenals, and 2, to break Phantasm.
Mm.
And then the second sideboard card in my reds is Exude Confidence. I think anybody who's played this deck or has played Guardian can tell you how valuable defense reactions are for those decks. And just being able to kind of go 2 non-attack actions, give your Exude Confidence go again, and then attack for like 7 to 10 really puts a damper on Guardian and usually allows you to leak through damage somewhere along that combat chain. So probably one of the most important cards in the aggro versus guardian/control matchups. Anytime you think your opponent is going to have D-reacts or it's not going to race you, you should be bringing in Exude Confidence. So decks like Viscerai, bring them in. Decks like Bravo, bring them in. Decks like Prism, bring it in. Decks like Ultim, bring it in.
Got it. And anybody can bring this in too. It's a generic 0 cost, right? So it seems like it would fit a
Yeah,
lot of decks.
yeah, exactly. I think this card was criminally underplayed when I first picked it up, and I'm going purely by the price because I think I got them for like close to $1 each. And I looked recently, and they're like up to $10 or something almost now.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
definitely I think a little less played than I would expect.
The investor in me saw this one a while back, and I picked up a few copies at around $5. So
I
yeah,
gotcha. Maybe I
happy to
paid
hear
more
they've
than.
doubled.
Yeah, I don't really recall what I picked them up for, but I remember looking it up recently, and they were significantly more than what I got it for. I want to say they
Solid.
were like a couple bucks, but could be
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, I was looking at the generics in Monarch, and I was like, okay, so why isn't this one? Okay, bye, bye, bye. Eh, yeah,
All right, so
couldn't
let's
help
let's
myself.
kind of go top to bottom. In terms of combos, this deck's fairly straightforward in the sense of playing. You When you look at your hand every turn, if you want to play it, you map out, how many go again effects do I have? Can I play every card in my hand? And then the next question is, if I can't, how do I block the most efficiently as possible? So I'll talk less about each card and kind of, well, less about a combo for each specific card, but we'll run through it real quick and I'll just give you my general thoughts on like when to use it and optimal play with each of them. So we can start with the top of the reds, which I think is Arcanic Crackle. So I will say that this card is probably the most benign looking card of the deck. A lot of people when they first get my list, they first ask me, can we cut Arcanic Crackle for something? And they're very surprised when I tell them that this is probably one of the best cards in the list, because it's so innocuous looking, right? 0 for 3, 1 arcane. What's the big deal? But with Briar, she has an ability where when an attack deals damage, no matter what type of damage it is, doesn't have to be combat, it procs the embodiment of her token. And so many times, just an Arcanic Crackle requires your opponent to give you a card, or you get 2 embodiment tokens, right? A card being they have to block with a card from their hand. So yeah, right there, the first ability,
Yeah,
embodiment of earth. So Arcanic Crackle is a great way to start off or finish a turn, I should say, being the last attack, because it basically asks your opponent, are you going to give me this massive defensive turn, or are you going to give me a card? And it kind of puts them between a rock and a hard place. Arcanic Shockwave, same kind of idea. It's functionally a 4 power one that's a little bit more situational, but it's the same kind of idea as the Arcanic Crackle. So both the Arcanics, very good defensive cards by
mm.
mostly being aggressive cards.
And that one can get fused as well, huh?
Yeah, so it's
Potentially.
yep. And then Ball Lightning, the card that kind of ties everything together. Obviously, it works well with Arcanic Shockwave, doubling your damage, the arcane damage that it does. But the real situations that Lightning shines is with the card Sting of Sorcery, which is the blue card below, which reads that it gives every one of your attacks this turn +1 arcane. So when you lead with a Sting of Sorcery followed by a Ball Lightning, every additional card, including the Ball Lightning itself, I should say, elemental card or lightning, will deal 2 damage instead of 1 arcane.
Oh wow.
So
Hmm.
2 arcane instead of 1 arcane. So, you know, in the Guardian matchups specifically, what I like to do is if you're thinking you're going to get fatigued, your opponent's kind of playing that way, is you pitch and you stack your deck in a certain way that you have Arcanic Crackles and Ball Lightnings on the bottom. So if you actually play 2 Arcanic Crackles, each Ball Lightning will do 2 damage. So it's 2 separate instances of 1 arcane. So if you play 2 Arcanic Crackles and a red Ball Lightning, you'll be coming in for 3 physical,
Hmm.
and 2 separate instances of arcane. So that's 2 and 2. And then if you have more Bolt Lightnings, the next one will come in for 3 and 3, and the next one will come in for 4 and 4.
Oh man,
So it'll do 18 arcane plus all that physical that I said, depending on what color your Bolt Lightnings are.
that's just brutal.
hmm
Sweet.
So the next card, Captain's Call. It is a modal card, probably the most versatile card in the deck. A lot of people say why I main deck the red ones and why not the blue ones, and the simple answer is Ravenous Rabble. This deck needs to maintain its ratios to ensure that Ravenous Rabble does not, lose its power. The more blues, the more yellows you add to the deck, the more percentage points you're kind of taking off yourself in the long term. People like to be very results oriented and just I'll add an extra blue, I'll add an extra blue, but every single percentage point counts in my opinion. So the red Captain's Call was probably the right play. I didn't get to live the dream runs and use the red captain's call to buff a command and conquer versus a Lexi deck. So that was fun, but yeah, which the blue one can't do. But and don't be afraid to give a card go again. A lot of the time, that's just fine. You can kind of use it, play another non-attack. To play, give the next attack go again. Play like a nimblism, for example, get a lightning surge token. Give your next attack go again, and then attack with sword. Those are completely fine turns, so don't be afraid to use the go again clause. Enlightened Strikes next. Not much to say about this card. It's probably one of the best generics in the game. Goes in almost every deck. Even the Calling winner had it in his Ultimate deck, which I thought was a little strange, but I digress. That card is very good. I think most people can read it and just take it at face value. Not much else to say
Yeah.
about
Yeah. All right.
it. Excuse me. Those are just my dogs.
No worries.
Something at the door. Twine Lightning. It's 4 power, 0 cost, the theme of the deck. It does have situational go again, but that's kind of the name of the game with this deck. 4 power, 0 cost, go again when possible. This one does not require, lightning surge tokens, so it is valuable in the sense that it can give itself go again. Next is Lightning Press. These cards have been a love-hate relationship for me. I'm not super fond of them, but they are a necessary evil to kind of push through damage on plunder run turns. One thing I really like to do, and I don't see enough people do it enough, is if you reveal it with an Arcanic Shockwave, for example, or an Entwined Lightning, it kind of puts your opponent in awkward spots where, you know, if there's an on-hit trigger, do they double block? Do they just let you have it? And most people will just opt to, oh, I can't block 10 damage or whatever if you come in with like a red plunder, an Arcanic Shockwave. But you don't always have to play it. I think it's very underrated just kind of holding the lightning press and arsenaling it and always kind of having that threat there. And it really puts your opponent in a little squeeze situation where at some point they're going to have to double block and then you can guarantee yourself an on hit later. You don't always have to use it the instant you draw it. So all I'll say about this is be a little bit more patient with it, especially if you reveal it, because you can really play some fun mind games with your opponent.
That's a great point. They know you can pump any attack at any time. Yeah, that's fun.
The next one, Lightning Surge. Just like Exude, or not Exude, Entwine Lightning, it is a 4 power. It is a conditional go again, but it is also a lightning card, so synergizes well, Ball Lightning, Shockwave, etc. So not much else to say about that. It's a lightning 4 power, potentially gets go again. Nimblism, probably the best pump spell in the deck. 0 for 3. Gets half a go again trigger with the embodiment of lightning. It's just a card you always want to see a lot of. Kind of the glue that holds the deck together. I'd play more if there were more types of nimblisms that existed, but unfortunately they're not, so running Captain's Call.
Fair.
Plunder Run. So this is the card that most people kind of talk about when they, ask, should this card be banned or is this what makes the deck too good? Knowing how to play your plunder runs well, I think, is the key to winning certain matchups. The front side of plunder run, if you just kind of play it outright, is not the best. So plunder run just basically reads if your attack hits, you can cycle it, right? And a 0-mana cycle is not the effect that you want to be doing with almost any deck. This is not exclusive to just Briar. So be very conscious of when you're kind of playing out naked plunder runs for no value. Usually you're trying to get an embodiment of lightning, but if anything, in the aggro matchups, I'd actually say your blue/yellow plunder runs are one of the worst cards in the deck. And in the mid to late game, they're the cards you want to be blocking with first. Because when it comes down to trading in the late game and low life, low resources, you don't often have the time to take a turn off to Arsenal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the real value of Red Plunder Run is the ability to get a nimblism plus an on-hit effect, right? That's the way I kind of read a Red Plunder Run. It is nimblism plus on-hit effect, and that's when it really shines. I just finished saying that nimblism is probably the best card in the deck, the glue that holds everything together. So If that's true, then Plunder Run's the creme brulee that kind of, is the sweet cherry on top. Just gets you your kind of insane turns when you get to play it.
Fair, fair.
So the summary of that: try not to play your Plunder Runs naked. Always arsenal them when having the chance. Uh, in the mirror match, try and block with them late game because you're probably not going to have the time to take a turn off, down a card, and even if you do, if it's a blue or yellow one, that extra +1 may not be worth it. So
Makes sense. All right.
Ravenous Rabble. So this card is probably the best card in the deck, which is why we ended up playing the yellows as well. It is the only unconditional go again, I think, in the game actually. I could be wrong about that, but yeah, just a super powerful effect. I rate Go Again as one of the strongest mechanics in the game. I don't think it's any surprise to know that the two broken champions so far have been Briar and Chain, and both of them have inherent Go Again printed as their abilities. So,
Hmm.
Ravenous Rabble, unconditional Go Again on a card. Talked about it a little bit earlier, but this is the reason you want to keep your ratio so tight, right? A 0 for 4 with Go Again is a fantastic rate. 0 for 2, not so great. 0 for 3 is okay, but we want to keep it 0 for 4 as often as possible. So that's the reasons the red and the yellow ratios are so tight.
Got it.
So yeah, that's kind of what I have to say about that. Scar for Scar. Again, this is probably your second best card in the sense that it's an unconditional go again. Even in the Guardian matchups, there's a lot of time when you can not block, get yourself lower, lead with it as an unconditional go again. Just a huge property of the deck that you'll see kind of recurs over and over again. But maximizing your go again effects is the name of the game.
Makes sense. Yep.
Snatch. So this is my built-in plunder run attack. When I first started this game, actually, I saw Snatch very early. I don't remember what deck was playing it, but I remember reading it and just thinking, "Gosh, this card is like fantastic. I want to play it in whatever deck I play." Um, Everybody knows how good plunder run is, so this is just kind of plunder run on a stick that you can beat your opponent over the head with. So, try and make it your last attack if your opponent's already blocked out. That way you can get an arsenal. It's a great card to use with your lightning press. Cycles the lightning press. Just a fantastic card. So,
Sonata.
Sonata Arconic. So, this is probably the most controversial card in the deck. A lot of people end up saying, it wasn't great, it whiffs a lot, which are both true statements, but it does two very important things. One is it allows you to kind of keep your ratios in check, right? Because ideally with this deck, you want slightly more attack actions than non-attack actions, and the worst case scenario is you draw a hand of 4 non-attack actions, right? Because if you have all this pressure on your opponent, you draw 4 non-attack actions, you're done.
Hmm.
What Sonata allows is in those situations, you can A, sink yellow or blue mana into it if you really want to dig for an extra card, but B, it kind of gets you out of the worst hands. So in my opinion, people are right. This card does whiff about 20% of the time, give or take. But it raises your floor, right? It kind of gives you outs to your worst hands possible, while also still being half a go again token um, with Briar's ability. So the worst case scenario, you can probably give a card go again, and if that's the case, it kind of reads like a flash, which isn't the worst card in the world. So I think the floor is very high, and it raises your worst possible hands with the deck a little bit. Now I talked a little bit, I think previously, I think with Tannen at some point. But I was telling him also, if you have, there's basically 3 scenarios, right? You have a made hand, which is essentially like a really good hand, regardless of if you have Sonata. You have a bad hand, which we just talked about, like 4 non-attack actions, and then you have like your average hand, right? So in the hand that you have the nuts, it doesn't really matter what you do, whether you block, whether you hit or not. It's just your hand's going to be nuts no matter what. In the case that you have really bad hand, like we talked about, it kind of bails you out. In the in-between hands, if you still have a functional turn coming up, I often will block with Sonata as soon as possible. So if I have 2 embodiments and Sonata is blocking for 4, and I have a very clean block set up, I kind of just go ahead and block with Sonata, trade 4 life, and that way my 3-card hand that comes in behind it still does its thing. But I'm gaining, a guaranteed 4 life from the Sonata instead of trying to play it and hopefully hit its effect. So in the situation where it's not the nuts and it's not the stains or worst hand ever, I tend to block with Sonata early and often.
Gotcha.
And then Weave Lightning, kind of just a situational nimblism. The Fuse part does come up, giving your Arcanic Shockwave, I think is the only card that's relevant for. It can give Shockwave go again. I think in my finals match, I actually had a sequence where I played a Pump Spell, played a Shockwave, revealed the Weave Lightning, then boots my original Shockwave to play the second Weave Lightning, played the Shockwave. Some cheekiness like that, but yeah, it does come up, and it is quite good when it does.
Some of the combos, it seems like when you're pitching, I mean, everything's a 0 cost for the most part. Just like a lot more options, it seems like, than the average hand would be for 4 cards.
And that's why I think a lot of people, when they first see this deck, they'll tell me, it's a easy deck, it's a basic deck, but in reality, you have so many more options than a normal deck, right?
Optionality does not necessarily equate to easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, they're Guardian players that, if they have a 6-costed card that they want to play, 2 blues and a yellow, they just block with the yellow. So a lot of their hands are made in a lot of ways, but with this hand, or with this deck, I should say, each hand, there's 4 different possibilities, 4 different combinations of cards you can play every single turn. And which cards you block with, which cards you keep are the key to it, right? Like if you're forced to block, or that blocking is good value, which one do you block with, right? In the previous scenario with Guardian, there's one clear card you're always going to block with, and if you need to block with an additional, then you'll do it. But with this deck, all 4 cards are functionally the same, but just slightly different enough that if you block with the wrong one, you're giving up a little incremental advantage here and there, and that's where the edges really come in the mirror match. So just thought I'd throw that out there for
fair, yeah. Good stuff. All right.
So yellows, won't talk about Ball Lightning and Plunder Runs again. Essentially, those are one of the 2 best cards in the deck, which is why the yellow counterparts are in the deck, even though they're slightly weaker.
Yeah.
But Pulse the Candlehold. This is purely a sideboard card for me for Guardian. I know the Arsenal Pass guys love to kind of play it in the mirror match. I'm not fully sold. They like it because it blocks your 4th with 1 embodiment. But I think the utility you lose of having a card, especially if you just want to be aggressive, is too much of a cost for me. And it's similar to a card of Force of Nature, which we'll talk about later as well. It's the same kind of idea to me. I'm not a big fan of these Jack of Spades, but it blocks for 4 type arguments. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah, right.
Ripped my earbud out there.
That's all right. I got your back. All right, Ravenous Rabble. Like I said, the only non-conditional go-again attack in the game. The yellows really were overperformers all weekend. Not much else to say other than I like the red so much. 0 for 3 with go again with no additional requirement is still an insane rate. So we played all of them that we get our hands on.
Fair.
And then Remembrance, this is a new addition to the deck, purely for the fatigue matchups, specifically Oldhim that will just try and hard fatigue you. Makes it a little bit easier where I can kind of run out my stings and balls a little bit earlier and then kind of shuffle them back in the deck and set up for that end game I talked about where I have multiple stings plus balls.
Just one, though. Just one Remembrance.
Just one, because you don't want to see multiple, and then because if you draw 1, you're already down a card, right, for your turn cycle. So if you draw 2 or 3, then you kind of you don't want to have your off turns, but 1 is enough that if I'm gonna get fatigued, I'm gonna see my entire deck. So deterministically, I'm gonna hit it at some point, and at that point, I can put the cards I want back in my deck and play to an end game. It's kind of just a cute little workaround for the fatigue strategy.
Fair. Okay, I like it.
Blue Captain's Calls. So we talked about Captain's Calls, but the reason the blue ones are here are actually for the ice matchups. So Oldhim and Lexi, the red ones will come out. I'll ruin my ratios a little bit, and I'll put in the blue ones just to kind of a nod towards the ice cards that they play.
Got it.
Force of Nature, this is the latest edition of the deck. It's a card I'm kind of trying out. I'm using it as kind of the 10th and 11th versions of Plunder Run. What this card says is if you fuse it, your next attack will get +1. And then if any attack this turn hits and its attack is greater than its base, you draw a card. Now, it is hard to get real value out of Force of Nature. You kind of need it on your most nut turns. Again, there are people that say they like to play it in the mirror match, but for reasons I said before, at face value, this card is basically a naked plunder run, right? And if you recall me saying, a situational cycle is not kind of what you want to be doing in almost any matchup, right? A card that says this card will replace itself if this condition happens is at face value a little bit weaker than a card that will guarantee you value.
Makes sense. Yep.
Now, a lot of people will say, well, it blocks for 3. And while that is true, just like the Pulse of Candlehold, you know, 1, it ruins your ratios because you're adding more blues to the deck. And 2, the effect is not the greatest in the world. Okay. The reason I play this card is, again, for ice matchups. I do like to up my blue count a little bit more when I'm playing against Lexi and Oldhim. And it's just simply that Force of Nature is the best blue card. The next best blue card that I could add, right? There was other blue cards. You know, I was thinking about Blue Ball Lightning for a little bit. I'm trying out the Blue Force of Nature. This slot is kind of up in the air. I could be drawn one way or another, but
So what I hear is that even though you already won Nats, you haven't stopped. You're still tuning this thing. You're making it better.
yeah, I'm still kind of playing around with ideas. I think at this point it's safe to say that Oldhim and Lexi are natural enemies of the deck. Lexi, a little bit less concerning for me because I think that deck does have an inherent fail rate. Maybe people just haven't figured out the most optimal version of the build yet. But even in our testing, you know, I went home and I played against Isaac Jensen's list the night before top 8. And in case, you know, he ended up winning and I ended up winning and we met in top 4, which didn't come true. But what we often found was, you know, there were times where he would kind of lock me down, lock me down, lock me down, and then he would stumble a turn. And the minute that happens and the corner turns, they're kind of on the back foot for the rest of the game. Or like you saw happen in his top 8 match, you know, sometimes they just whiff. And it does happen a good amount of times. It's not actually an oddity of the deck. I think it's, you know, it just the function of being a ranger, the same way that Runeblade needs a good ratio of non-attacks attacks. Sometimes they can just draw no arrows, all arrows, and just be left with very awkward hands. So
yeah, I mean that whiff in the top 8 was brutal to watch, though.
I felt bad for him. You know, it's safe to say that if he won there, you know, I think he had. We ended up working out that it was pretty close to a coin flip. I think maybe he had an edge, but you know, we figured a couple things out, like bringing in time snaps and certain blues and playing around the blizzard. So, you know, I felt okay about the matchup. It definitely wasn't my number 1 pick, but I don't think, you know, either of us was a significant dog. Maybe he had an edge, 5-6% edge, but I will say if he wanted the quarters, you know, he beats me. He's probably the one playing Michael in the finals. Not sure how the deck does against Chain. I can't imagine it's the best because Chain hyper aggressive, just like Briar, but has a lot more blues. So I think it cares a little bit less about the Frost. But I could be wrong. So it was definitely his tournament to win. A lot of Briars in that top 8, and you know he was the Lexi that kind of got through. So a little bit unfortunate for him. I'm sure. I'd love to get his thoughts on it too.
Yeah, I was hoping to definitely reach out to Isaac at some point and do a deck tech with him as well, and see what he has to say for sure. Like, what would he change? You know, would he change his ratio a little bit? Or, I mean, like, obviously, if you're dealing with arrows, you've got to find a way to get things in a situation where whiffing is just like if you whiff at the wrong time, you're screwed, right? So
Right.
You have to eliminate that as much as possible, obviously. And that's probably the name of the game with any of the Rangers. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I found it interesting that we had a wizard that I think took 16th in nationals, and then in the UK, or no, it wasn't. I
I
think
think
it
it
was
won
Italy.
Italy.
One
Yeah.
in Italy, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was pretty stoked to see that. Kind of interesting, I think. What do you? How does? I mean, you said it was a race between Briar and Kano, typically. Uh,
Yeah, I played against it a little bit in my testing. There's not much to the matchup. We're kind of just two ships sailing across in the night, and it's like a race to the finish line. So, um, there was a question at one point: do I play the is it Spellfray? The one it's like Spellfray something. It comes in only the Blitz decks. It's the same kind of
oh,
arcane
Spellfray
variant.
Cloak,
Yeah,
yeah.
and you can sacrifice it for an extra, life. Because you don't want to do arcane barrier because you don't want to pay resources into that because you're giving up cards. But what we found was we can actually race the Kano pretty well, just having the 4 life from shock charmers. So it kind of makes them draw their best hand in order to beat us. And if that happens, then so be it. But you kind of just put them in the squeeze where I think the Briar list is much more consistent at outputting high amounts of damage. And we kind of just put our hand on the table, say, can you deal 44 damage to us? If they can, they win. If they can't, then they're going to lose. I think more often than not, you're going to find that you end up winning that race as Briar.
Nice. That's the name of the game. Got to race into the bottom, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
I wish there was a more elegant way of playing that match, but there's really not. It's like you show me your shit, I'll show you mine, and we'll see who
yeah.
signs the match slip at the end.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Fair. Well, this has been pretty educational. There's a couple last cards here. Should we talk about? We already
yeah.
mentioned Sting of Sorcery, but
Sting of Sorcery, yeah. So I think the only other thing I didn't. So I talked a little bit about how it works with ball lightning, but it does give each attack the one arcane trigger. So this is great for the turns that you want to be offensive and defensive because each point of arcane you deal gives you an embodiment of Earth tokens. So if you have 3 attacks and all 3 attacks hit, plus they do 3 arcane, you're going to end up with 6 embodiments of lightning. Excuse me, of Earth. So
mm,
I think my max on one turn was I ended up with 8 embodiments. So
jeez,
uh, yeah, so you can get a bunch of embodiment of Earths with Sting of Sorcery. So one of the best cards in the deck for sure.
awesome.
And then Gorganian Tome, probably the best card in the deck, the card you always want to see. If I could start with one card in my hand every game, this would be the card it is. Um, Given with Briar's ability, it's basically just half a go again, draw a card, which is insane.
Hmm. So you just get free cards and then go again. Yep.
Yeah, there's a funny story where um, I came originally from a game called Yu-Gi-Oh, and there was a card in it called Upstart Goblin. I don't know if you're familiar with the game at all or what Upstart Goblin is.
Mm-mm.
Uh, but in the game, essentially, each player starts with 8,000 life points, and the card is functionally 0 mana. You draw a card, and your opponent gains 1,000 life. And that's all it does. It's draw a card, your opponent gains some life, period. And that card was underlooked for, I want to say, like 10, 12 years, maybe longer of the game's existence until people realized that it was probably the best card in the game. Like just being able to start your game with your deck with 3 less cards in it was super huge.
Hmm.
Um, so when I came over to Magic for the first time, there was a card called Gitaxian Probe, and it was like 15, 20 cents. Maybe it was like a bulk common. And coming from a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm like, this card's insane. Like, it's a free draw card. And all my friends are like, you're crazy. I bought like 50 of them. And sure enough, it ended up being absolutely insane. And, it spiked to like $10 a card at one point. I think I sold a bunch of them. They like a couple $1,000. But
Nice.
yeah, so it ended up being broken there. And then I came to this game, and again, I read Gorganian Tome, and I'm like, why isn't every deck playing this? Now it does have a downside in this game, albeit. So I digress. It is slightly
You
different,
can't
but
block with it, right? Yeah.
can't block with it either. So well, Taxing Probe had its own downsides. In Magic, it costs you 2 life, and it made your mulligan choices harder, and there's all these like little things about Probe as well that people used as an argument to say it wasn't good when I first picked up a bunch. Anyways, the Tome, very much in the same vein. I thought that card was insane, and then I was told this card's kind of mediocre. It's not that great, but was victorious again, and that was
I'm seeing it a lot more lately. So yeah,
yeah.
I think you
So
may have
just
won out.
yeah, so just a
Uh,
little fun backstory on those kind of card effects. So now, whenever I see a card like that, no matter what game I play, I'm probably going to just play a unconditional cycle.
Fair. Awesome. Well, Tarek, I don't want to keep you much longer here. It's been 45 minutes already, but man, I really appreciate your time and running us through your deck list. And any parting thoughts for viewers here?
No, thanks for having me, Chris. I'm happy to be here, happy to do it. If anybody has any questions, my DMs are always open. You can follow me on Twitter, Tariq Patel 10. I do this for the love of the game, so just shoot me a question if you have a question, and I'll be sure to answer it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir. Thanks for being
Yeah,
on.
you're very
All
welcome.
right.
Take care.
Take care. See ya.